Some people become famous because they want the world to know their name. Steve Irwin was different. He became famous because he wanted the world to know the animals. To millions of people, he was the energetic Australian guy who jumped into rivers, grabbed crocodiles, picked up snakes, and shouted, "Crikey," with a smile on his face. But behind that unforgettable personality was something much deeper. Steve Irwin genuinely loved wildlife. And his life wasn't just about entertaining people. It was about teaching them to respect the natural world. This is the story of the man who turned his childhood passion into a worldwide mission, and left behind a legacy that continues long after his final adventure. Steve Irwin was born on February 22, 1962, in Victoria, Australia. When he was still young, his family moved to Queensland, where his parents opened a small reptile park. For most children, growing up around snakes and crocodiles might have been terrifying. For Steve, it was paradise. While other kids were playing with ordinary toys, Steve was learning about reptiles. He developed an incredible connection with animals at a very young age. By the time he was a child, he was already comfortable handling snakes and helping his family work with crocodiles. But Steve wasn't simply fearless. He understood that wild animals deserved respect. He knew a crocodile wasn't evil. A snake wasn't evil. A stingray wasn't evil. They were simply animals doing what nature had taught them to do. That idea would become one of the most important messages of his life. As Steve grew older, his passion for wildlife became stronger. He spent years working with crocodiles and helping capture and relocate problem animals. He wasn't interested in destroying wildlife. He wanted people and animals to find a way to live alongside each other. Then, in the early 1990s, something happened that would change Steve's life forever. He met Terry Raines, an American wildlife enthusiast who was visiting Australia. They immediately connected through their shared love of animals. Their relationship moved quickly, and they eventually married. But even their honeymoon wasn't ordinary. Instead of relaxing at a beautiful resort, Steve and Terry went out filming a wildlife documentary while Steve was working with a crocodile. That footage became the beginning of something much bigger. It introduced the world to Steve Irwin. Soon, the Crocodile Hunter was reaching audiences around the globe. And Steve was unlike anyone viewers had ever seen. He didn't calmly stand behind a safe barrier and talk about animals. He jumped into the action. He wrestled crocodiles. He held enormous snakes. He chased dangerous reptiles. He got covered in mud. He laughed. He screamed. And he constantly shouted, "Crikey." But beneath all the excitement was a serious purpose. Steve wanted people to understand wildlife. He wanted children to become fascinated by animals instead of being afraid of them. He wanted people to understand that every creature had a place in nature. And somehow, he made conservation entertaining. That was his gift. He could take an animal that most people would run away from and make millions of viewers say, "Wow, look at that." Steve didn't just show people wildlife. He made them care about it. As his popularity grew, so did his dream. The small reptile park from his childhood became Australia Zoo. But Steve didn't want it to be just another zoo. He wanted it to become a place where people could learn, where injured animals could receive help, and where conservation could actually happen. Steve and his family worked tirelessly to turn that dream into reality. His television career helped bring attention to wildlife conservation around the world. But behind the cameras, he was still working, still rescuing animals, still educating people, still dreaming bigger. And then Steve became a father. His daughter, Bindi, was born in 1998. His son, Robert, followed in 2003. For Steve, becoming a father changed everything. The wild man the world saw on television was also a loving dad who wanted his children to understand the same things he had learned growing up. He wanted them to respect animals. He wanted them to understand responsibility. And most importantly, he wanted them to love life. Steve often brought his children into his world. They grew up around wildlife, just as he had. They weren't simply watching their father's work. They were becoming part of his mission. And then came the day nobody expected. September 4, 2006. Steve was filming a documentary in the waters near Australia's Great Barrier Reef. He encountered a stingray. During the encounter, the animal suddenly struck Steve with its barb. The injury was fatal. Steve Irwin was gone. He was only 44 years old. The news shocked the world. It was almost impossible to believe. The man who had spent his life standing inches away from crocodiles and snakes had died while filming underwater. Millions of people who had never met Steve felt as if they had lost someone they knew. Children cried. Families remembered watching him together. Fans around the world suddenly realized how much this energetic Australian had meant to them. But perhaps the saddest part was thinking about his family. Terry had lost her husband. Bindi had lost her father. Robert had lost his dad. And the world had lost one of its most recognizable voices for wildlife. But Steve's story didn't end that day. Because the mission he created was bigger than one person. Terry continued the work. Bindi continued the work. Robert continued the work. Australia Zoo continued to grow. And the message Steve had spent his entire life sharing continued to reach new generations. That's what makes his story so powerful. Steve Irwin didn't simply leave behind television shows. He left behind a way of looking at the world. He taught people that wildlife isn't something we should automatically fear. It's something we should understand. He taught us that conservation isn't just about saving beautiful animals. It's about protecting the balance of nature. And he showed us that one person's passion can reach millions of people. When I think about Steve Irwin, I don't think only about the crocodiles. I think about the smile, the excitement, the crazy adventures, the love he had for his family, and the way his entire face would light up whenever he talked about an animal. Steve didn't live a perfect or ordinary life. He lived a passionate one. He found something he loved as a child and spent his entire life protecting it. And maybe that's the greatest lesson he left behind. Find something worth caring about. Love it completely, and use whatever voice you have to make the world care about it too. Steve Irwin's voice may have gone silent in 2006. But his message never did. Today, his children continue to carry his legacy. The animals he fought to protect continue to inspire people. And somewhere, a child is probably watching an old episode of the Crocodile Hunter, seeing Steve grab a crocodile and shouting with excitement, "Crikey!" And that child might grow up loving wildlife because of him. That's a legacy. Not money, not fame, not a statue. A legacy is when something you believed in continues living through other people. Steve Irwin spent his life showing the world that animals matter. And in the process, he became much more than a television personality. He became a symbol of passion, family, adventure, and conservation. He taught us to look at the wild with curiosity instead of fear. And even after all these years, his spirit still feels alive. Because Steve Irwin didn't just love wildlife. He taught the world how to love it too. And if there's one thing I think Steve would want us to remember, it's simple. Respect animals. Protect nature. And never stop caring. Crikey.